Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Here's Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. CARICOM's 50th Anniversary Summit in July will be hosted by Trinidad and Tobago, where it all started 50 years ago. This story takes the lead in today's edition of Caribbean Perspective for Friday, 2nd June 2023. Details after this important message.
Hubbard's Motor Department Mount Gay and Hubbard's Tire Bay, located at the Building Supplies Compound in Grand Anse, are reminding the motoring public that another round for licensing and inspection has begun. Just arrived on new shipments of quality furrowed and torque tires to fit all makes and models of vehicles at competitive pricing. Shop early to avoid the hassle of long lines. WhatsApp them on 473-405-5482. Hubbard's, quality service, affordable prices.
Welcome back. Trinidad and Tobago will play a major role in the Caribbean community's upcoming 50th anniversary celebrations. Terrian Brown Campbell has the details from TTT News.
Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley says Trinidad and Tobago will host regional leaders as the Caribbean celebrates the formation of CARICOM.
With the cooperation of the government of Dominica and my CARICOM colleagues, they raised and supported the idea that so significant is that development. 50 years as a CARICOM, and Trinidad and Tobago and Chagaramas being so central in its coming into being, that Trinidad and Tobago should be allowed the honor of hosting the event, even though Dominica will be the chair.
Dr. Rowley, noting that former Prime Minister Dr. Eric Williams played a major role in the formation of CARICOM, said had Dr. Williams realized his dream in full, this region would have been a more powerful and internationally significant entity.
So come the first week of July, Trinidad and Tobago having accepted that overture, we will host the 50th anniversary of the CARICOM, an international event.
The event is scheduled to run from July 1st to 5th. Terrian Brown Campbell, TTT News.
In the meantime, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley is sticking to his statement on the Trinidad and Tobago government's decision to restructure Petrotrin. Terrian Brown Campbell again has more.
Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley maintains the restructuring of Petrotrin was the only move to save this country from having to face the dire consequences of poor decision-making.
In restructuring it, we saved ourselves a downgrade and possibly a huge devaluation of our currency. Because August 2018, the Minister of Finance had to find a check for $850 million US.
Dr. Rowley notes this was repayment for a number of loans which had been taken by the energy company.
Had we done what other governments had done, which was to kick the can down the road and not be in a position to service that $850 million US debt, we would have ended up in an IMF program. We would have ended up with a devaluation of the currency, and we would have ended up with a quality of life in this country that we had not anticipated in any small measure.
The Prime Minister said Petrotrin could not pay the money, but after the restructuring, Heritage is able to make the repayments.
We were refining other people's oil, buying it at over 100,000 barrels per day, refining it in our refinery, guaranteed to lose between $7 and $15 a barrel. And the projections for the 5-year period in front of us, 2018 going forward, was for a guaranteed minimum loss of $5 billion.
Dr. Rowley insisted the state-owned energy company, and by extension the country, is in a much better position as a result of government's decision. Terrian Brown Campbell, TTT News.
The United States sanctions on Venezuela are affecting Trinidad and Tobago's energy deal or dealings with that particular South American country. Even as he confirmed this, Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley assured that government continues to make progress. More in this TTT news item, again with Terry and Brown Campbell.
According to Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley, the United States government's continued sanctions on Venezuela is negatively impacting this country.
I went to Washington and I met with some advisors to the president and some senior executives there. And I did tell them, what I should tell you now, that Trinidad and Tobago is suffering from collateral damage of United States foreign policy on Venezuela.
Dr. Rowley noted progress has been slow in getting the allowances needed from the U.S. to allow this country to monetize the resources of the Loran, Manatee, and Dragon fields. The first field is in territory shared by this country and Venezuela, and the second is solely owned by Venezuela.
The first hurdle was crossed when we got the Americans to agree to give us an OFAC license. It involved Minister Young traveling to Washington at my instructions and guidance probably 8 times, and myself 3 or 4 times. We've met virtually everybody who's involved in the government of the United States and on the other side as well. We finally got an OFAC license. But the license has a condition on it, which the Venezuelans find unacceptable. We're working on that too.
An OFAC license is authorization from the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control to engage in a transaction which might otherwise be prohibited.
And to allow Trinidad and Tobago, which Shell as the operator, to proceed to take steps to extract 27% of the Loran Manatee field. It requires serious engineering work and so on before. So it takes some time between the decision and the actual extraction. Shell has agreed to fund that arrangement, and of course it will involve some significant, the last time we approximated it, it was in the order of $500 million US.
The Prime Minister noted this figure covers the resources Shell will need to put out to begin extracting gas. Terry Ann Brown Campbell, TTT News.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick.
The Trinidad and Tobago government has been accepting bid recommendations for 6 of the 8 offshore oil exploration blocks. This sets the stage for awards to be disclosed as soon as this week. Here is Tiana Cole of HGP Nightly Regional News with more.
The Caribbean nation has pushed to expand exploration to conquer declines in its oil and gas production. A decision to award license was taken by the country's cabinet on Thursday on the recommendation of Trinidad and Tobago Energy Minister Stuart Young. The Energy Ministry expects to pursue negotiations with companies that bid on the 2 unawarded blocks to gauge whether they might improve their offers.
Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and Brazilian leader Luis Lula da Silva on Monday assailed the U.S. sanctions on Venezuela.
Maduro said he hopes a regional South America summit in Brasilia will call for their removal. Lula called the U.S. sanctions extremely exaggerated and criticized the United States for denying the legitimacy of fellow leftist Maduro, who was considered by Washington an authoritarian leader who was not allowed free elections. The Venezuelan president also said his country wants to be part of the BRICS group of leading emerging nations, which Lula said he would personally favor. Lula said he argued with the United States and fellow social democrats over Maduro's legitimacy and the 900 sanctions Venezuela faces. Quote unquote, "I think it is really absurd that they deny that Maduro is president of Venezuela," he said.
In other news, approval has been granted by Parliament for the establishment of a special fund for the purpose of undertaking an anti-crime initiative in St. Lucia. The Anti-Crime Initiative Fund, as it will be known, will be financed by the sale of confiscated assets that have been obtained through criminal activity. Zane Romulus of the DBS News World reports.
A resolution tabled by the Prime Minister and Minister for National Security to establish the Anti-Crime Initiative Fund was passed in the Lower House on Tuesday. The monies to be paid into this special account will be from confiscated cash and the sale of forfeited property. Proceeds from the Anti-Crime Initiative Fund will go towards financing national security initiatives. The special account was set up based on a request from the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, which recommended the separate account be created apart from the consolidated fund.
What this resolution calls for is that special account where the use of the money can be transparent and the money can be accounted for. This is all, Mr. Speaker, and this is to be able to meet our mutual evaluation requirements and be in compliance with the requirements of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. Nothing new, Mr. Speaker, just an account where we can put all money that's seized and confiscated, and we can be able to account for it in a transparent matter.
The establishment of the special account was generally supported by the opposition.
I do believe that funds, as indicated there, should be separate and apart from what goes into the consolidation fund. Because I remember many years ago, in a different environment, a group of us were arguing that governments are some of the biggest money launderers because you seize money from people and then you now go out and spend that money, which was proceeds of crime. I would also like to find out whether the recent passing of the security and health levy, whether the security aspect would be going into that account at all, considering the proceeds of the account is to assist in crime prevention and law enforcement and other measures of national security. We also know, Mr. Speaker, that when these funds are seized or repossessed or assets, unless the court has made a ruling, really and truly the funds cannot be spent. And so I was asking whether it would still be going into that account or whether there's an escrow account that it would be held as separate and apart from. And just one more request, Mr. Speaker, is that I know from my experience in the last government, some of these funds were used to assist the police in vehicles and the likes. And I'm hoping, that a request for an unmarked vehicle for Choiseul Saltibus could be made available.
The Prime Minister has made it clear that funds raised through the Health and Security Levy will not be placed in the Anti-Crime Initiative Fund. For the DBS News World, I am Zaid Romulus.
Over in Haiti, we are told violence by arbitrary gangs have fallen drastically since the emergence of a vigilante justice movement that has seen at least 160 suspected criminals killed in the last month, according to a report of a local research human rights group, CARDO.
The situation in the Caribbean country remains extremely volatile as heavily armed gangs continue to drive a humanitarian crisis that has displaced tens of thousands amid frequent kidnappings for ransom, gang rapes, tortures, and murders. The vigilante movement, known as Boakale, began after residents of the capital Port-au-Prince lynched and set fire to over a dozen suspected gang members in the early morning of April 24. Carter said almost no kidnappings had been recorded in the last month and counted 43 gang-linked murders, down from 146 in the first 3 weeks of April.
The hurricane season is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
I am Eddie Frederick, wishing you a restful weekend. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.